Hello everyone, and welcome to another free webinar from the ICC, International Coaching Community. My name is Alexis, and I want to give you a warm welcome to our webinar today with Joseph O'Connor about the 3 keys to executive coaching. And I want to start by checking the audio and the video. So if you could please raise your hands on the app or on the application on your computer. Raise your hand, click on the hand symbol if you can hear me and if you can see the screen. So we know that everything's okay. A little worried. Okay, I see just a hand or two. Well, I guess you can hear me fine. And if you have any problems with the audio or the video, please let me know. If you have any comments or any questions during the session, please write your questions on the questions panel, and we will be looking at your questions at the right time. So without further ado, I'm going to leave you here with Joseph O'Connor, who will talk to us about this interesting topic. Hello, Joseph.
Hi, Alexis. Hi, everybody. Thanks for the introduction, and I hope all the technology works well and supports us in our quest for the best executive coaching. So welcome. It's a beautiful day here in London. It's about 0 degrees, but the sun is shining, which is great. And I think from the number of people that are here, it looks like, at least from the names, we have some attendees from Russia, so welcome, and maybe some attendees from other parts of the world, although I know that Irene, who's also present, was organizing particularly around Indonesia and Southeast Asia. So welcome from wherever you are. Let's go straight in. I'm just getting a message here that says there could be connection difficulties. I'm hoping that you can all hear me, and Alexis, if anything, if anything okay comes up as a problem, then let me know.
Yes,
okay, great. I just got a message there. Good. Okay, so I shall continue and assume everything is all right, unless I hear to the contrary. So, okay, 3 keys to executive coaching. There are, I guess, altogether many keys to executive coaching. However, the 3 that I've selected, I think are really, really important. There are other keys. There are many doors, as it were, into executive coaching. But I think that these 3 keys will open some of the main ones, and indeed some of the most difficult ones that executive coaches meet. So, I think you probably know me. I'm one of the co-founders of the ICC, together with Andrea Lages, my wife and partner. And executive coaching is really something that I enjoy and love to do. It's my main work, because to coach executives who have a lot of power and influence over sometimes extremely big companies, multinational companies, means that as a coach, the amount of good that you can do in the world for people, for businesses, for the world even, is immense. It's a big leverage point. So that's particularly why I'm interested in executive coaching, and I guess you are too. You get to meet some extremely interesting people. So that's my interest. As you probably know, I'm going to be doing an executive coaching as ICC certified international executive coaching training in Jakarta, and I'll tell you a bit more about that later. It's going to be in February by the Congress, the ICC Coaching Congress, also in Jakarta. So what I want to do is to just go through, and of course we've only got an hour, so this is going to be a bit of a quick tour. Executive coaching is an amazing and fascinating business, and we do 6 days of it in the coaching training, covering in detail the things that we're going to touch on here and many more things as well. So don't think for a moment that we're going to cover everything here in this webinar. This is just a taster. I also think that what's very important in coaching is the return on investment. In other words, particularly for executives, they want to make sure that the money that they invest in executive coaching, which can be considerable, is going to be repaid. In other words, whatever money the business puts in, it's going to come back in various ways to a much greater percentage. And there's been some studies on this, and indeed I've done a study on it, and this is true. And I want, in this session too, for you to get something practical that you can use to make a difference, because you are listening to this webinar. You could be doing many other things. So I thank you for giving me your attention, and your attention is priceless. It's something that cannot be bought, just as the coach's attention is priceless and cannot be bought. And I hope that you will get something here that you will be able to go away and use, because however interesting these things may be, in the end, we want to convert them into action and results. So, okay, let me continue, and we will move on here. So, just in general, what does executive coaching do? Well, it certainly builds leadership. The main reason why businesses take up executive coaches, and that is probably one of the greatest growth areas in coaching, executive coaching, one-to-one executive coaching. And it's nearly always by an external coach, which makes you guys as external executive coaches very important. Is to build leadership so that the executive has the leadership capabilities to lead the organization, to lead their team. Of course, it builds accountability and responsibility. Accountability is something that you have, as it were, to yourself. You hold yourself accountable. So even if nobody knows when something goes wrong, or you don't keep a promise or something like that, you know. And therefore you hold yourself accountable to your values and standards. And a coach is an accountability partner in that, because the executive will share their accountability with the coach, and they may not share it with anybody else. Responsibility, of course, is something that goes externally. Responsibility, executives have responsibility to other people. They are able to respond, because in English the word responsibility comes from the two words, the ability to respond. In other words, the capability, the skill to be able to do the right thing in response to whatever challenges come up. Of course, the executive needs to build a business, and they will build a business by developing the people in the business. There has been a lot of writing and news indeed about businesses being built almost against people. In other words, exploiting people, being unethical, trying to build a business at all costs, making a profit, and forgetting about the people who actually produce that. So executives always need to be connected to their people. That's an extremely important point. It's not just about executive skills. Leadership is connecting with people, making people want to follow you. And then, of course, aligning goals, values, and results. Goals, what you want; values, why those things are important; and the results that you get from that. Okay.
Joseph, sorry to interrupt. Yeah. Very quickly. I think we're having the same issue as the other day, where the right part and the bottom of the slide are being left out of the screen.
Okay.
So it's probably...
so then let's go here. And here. And tell me if that's any better.
It's the same.
I don't know what to do then, because that's what I did the other day.
You need to exit the presentation mode by hitting escape.
I did that.
I'm still seeing the presentation mode.
That's weird.
Which means your computer.
That's presentation mode, and this isn't. That's escaped.
It's not moving. It's not moving doing anything.
Okay.
Wait a second. Please forgive us, everyone. We're having some technical difficulties at the moment. Give us a second. Can you stop sharing your screen and share it again?
Sharing. How do I do that? Sharing. Sorry, how do I do that, Alexis?
Give me just 1 second. I'll change the power of presenter. 1 second. Okay, show your screen again, please.
Okay.
Okay, it seems to be working fine now.
Good. Okay. Then let's carry on to presence, one of the first keys. And presence is about who you are. When you coach as an executive coach, your presence, who you are, and how you create the relationship with the executive is more important than in other aspects of coaching. You are one of the important influences on the executive. There are, I guess, 3 really important aspects to getting results in executive coaching, and the first is presence. Who you are, how you create that space for the person. Another is, of course, commitment, the commitment of the client. If the executive is not committed to the process, you really won't get anywhere. But one of the most important ways that you can get the commitment of the executive to the process is by your presence, by your being there. And of course, then you need the skills. Once you're there, you do need the skills in order to get results. So presence is about being there, being really present. Because if you've ever had the experience of talking with someone who kind of was thinking of something else was more important. Of course, nowadays we have a lot of people paying more attention to their telephone screens than the people that they're actually interacting with, the real people. The telephone screen, cell phone screen is much more important than the person. And if you've had the experience of talking with someone who seems to be more concerned about their screen than about you, it's quite difficult actually to master your thoughts, to arrange your thoughts, to think clearly and to engage the other person. It's almost like if they're not listening to you, you lose something of your ability to communicate, because communication is a two-way process. So that presence of being there, first of all, creates a space where the executive feels safe in order to share what the important things are, because executives don't have a lot of people that they can share with their difficulties. They're supposed to know everything. They're not supposed to show weakness, and therefore they tend to keep things well buttoned up and put on a show of well, I can do everything, I'm fine, thank you very much. But they're not. Nobody is. No. Everybody has their issues, and especially executives. They have a very stressful job, and of course they're human beings, and they have their own personal aspects as well. So in order to help the executive to open up, you need to be there to really listen. And that means that you, the coach, become a real person. You give your attention, and that means that you are no longer a commodity, because it's very sad that a lot of coaching in business is chosen on what I call beauty contest. In other words, the human resources department asks, how much will it cost for you to coach these people? And then they get a lot of different bids, and then they try and select the cheapest one usually. That's making coaching a commodity. And coaching is not a commodity. Coaching is not something like groceries that you can buy, where they're all pretty much the same, and everything else being equal, you buy the cheapest. Coaching is not like that. Coaching depends on your unique presence as a person. And the more you bring that in, the less you will need to undertake these beauty contests with HR. Sorry, excuse me a moment, just a sec. Yes, I'm right in the middle of the webinar. What is it? Well, what do you need? West End Kids, 0208 123 2025. That's the only number, but God, it's ridiculous. You sure you're in the right place? Oh, isn't? Huh? I'm just looking at the email here, but there's no other number. Just a sec. No, that's the only number it gives, 0208 123 2025. Okay, sorry, love. Okay. Sorry, back again. Emergency there. So, presence. Yup, and it makes you unique. So, maybe you can think of a time when you were really present for someone, when you were really there for somebody, you were listening, you were paying attention. They were the most important person, the most important thing to you. And just think about the quality of that interaction. What was the quality of that interaction? And maybe you can type in some one-word answers to that into the chat box, and Alexis can read them out. What was the quality of that interaction? Just type some one-word answers there, when you were really present, really listening, really paying attention to somebody. Alexis, can you read out some of the
Yes.
words?
We have one comment from Andres, and he says that there was openness.
Openness. Anything else?
That seems to be the only comment so far. They say kindness also, Katerina. God's energy, Alexandra says.
Energy. Yeah. Yes, these are the sorts of things when you're really there, and those sorts of things they help the executive to be their best. When we coach, it's not just about the things that we do and the questions that we ask that help other people to be their best. It's how we are and how we're present and how much attention we give. So these things for executives and for executive coaches, they are worth money. You can't buy them. You can't buy someone's attention, but when you get it, it's priceless, really, absolutely priceless. So certainly in executive coaching, we'll be looking at, well, what is presence and how can you increase your presence as an executive coach in order to be more successful and connect with the executives in a great way that makes them feel able to talk to you, and therefore you are able to help them. So presence makes coaching a unique human service. And of course, one of the most important things about presence is listening. If you've been talking to someone and they keep having to ask you, supposing you're talking with someone, they keep saying, sorry, could you say that again? What did you say? And they're not listening, or they repeat back to you something that you didn't say, or they argue with a point that you didn't make. Again, you don't feel that person is present. So listening is really, really important. And listening is far more than just hearing the words. Hearing the words, you need to hear what's behind the words, the emotions behind the words. You need to hear the questions behind the questions. You need to hear the gaps in what the people don't say and should be there, but aren't. That's some of the most important things. And when you really listen and really present, you'll be able to hear those things as well. So again, in the training, we're going to go into that in quite some detail, because conversation is like music. You hear the notes, but what makes the notes into something beautiful is the spaces between the notes. Without the spaces between the notes, there's no music. So what are the spaces between what people say? What don't they say? What do they leave out that they really should be talking about, and that you need to actually get them to talk about? Okay, so listening, you can listen at different levels. Hearing is simply when you hear the words and you can repeat them back. That's just a matter of physics. It's a matter of sound waves bouncing off your eardrums, or rather going through your going through the eardrums, going into the brain, and the brain making sense of them. And that's it. Listening past there, when you're listening for content, is when you're actually listening to what the person says and you can understand it intellectually. You understand what they're saying. It's not just a stream of words. But then meaning, what does it mean? What does this content mean at its deeper level? What does it mean for the person's goals and values? What does it mean for their emotions? What does it mean when it's connected to the rest of that person, the other goals and values of the person? How does it connect? Nothing stands on its own. And of course, you can also listen even past meaning to the identity, to the uniqueness of that particular person talking to you right here, right now, about whatever it is. And that's a unique moment. And being with a person in a unique moment like that is an amazing experience, not only for the person, but also for the coach. Okay, so that's really quite a brief, very brief tour around presence, and just to flag up how important it is. Key 2, agreement. So this sounds like a bit of a funny one, but agreement is when two people come together and cooperate in some kind of way. One person often asks another person to do something, and the other person responds, and there's some agreement about what is done. And of course, this is the whole basis of how business works, how government works, how relationships work. You agree on quite a few things. And then when you agree, you can work together because you're working together towards the same thing. And unfortunately, we all, including executives, make agreements which we don't keep. And I think as coaches, it is really, really important that we model making good agreements and keeping them. In other words, that you are trustworthy as a coach. You when you say something, you can be relied on to carry it out, unless there is some emergency comes up. So coaches need to be absolutely impeccable in their agreements, or if something comes up, to renegotiate another agreement, and to model that for executives, because nothing destroys trust in an organization so much as executives who say one thing and do another. People just don't know where they are, and in the end they don't trust anything. And when people don't trust, then businesses fall apart. There's no commitment. And it's all down to whether you are perceived as trustworthy in keeping agreements. So without agreement, there's no commitment. And without commitment and action, there's no result. It all starts with making good agreements and then sticking to them. They're essential skills for a coach. They're essential skills for leaders. And my experience is that one of the greatest things that you will need to coach leaders with is exactly in this area, making good agreements and then sticking with them. Now, the enemy of agreements is what's called management by expectation. And management by expectation is when, instead of making clear agreements, you expect people to do things without the clarity. And then, of course, it's quite likely that the other person does not do what you expect them to do, because how could they? They don't know. You haven't made an agreement with them. So then they don't do it. And then, of course, you expected them to do it. And this can lead to anger, to disappointment, to resentment, blame, particularly, and you get a kind of victim culture. So expectation is one of the big enemies of good leadership, good management, good executive coaching. Because expectation is something that only one person has. If I expect you to do something, then if you do it, well, then I expected it, so no big deal. If you don't do it, then I could be very disappointed. I could be angry. I could blame you, and then you could feel really, well, that's not fair. You know, I wasn't clear that I was supposed to do that. Why is that other person angry? Why are they blaming me? It's not my fault. And this leads to a culture of fear, a culture of victims, people getting blamed, and again, it destroys trust. So expectations are the enemy of agreements. And again, if you think maybe there's been an experience in your past where you expected someone to do something and they didn't, and you were disappointed. Things didn't work out the way you planned. You felt let down. And it's interesting to go back on some of these as a little kind of lesson for ourselves and work out, well, what was the basis of your expectations? Why did you expect the person to do that? How did you communicate your expectations? And sometimes, you know, we think that we've been very clear about asking someone to do something and we expect them to do it, but yet they are not clear about what was expected of them, and therefore when they don't do it, they feel it's not fair. So the expectations come from one side only. Agreements come from both sides. So management by agreement, making clear agreements, being very clear about what you want, checking that the other person understands that exactly. Be impeccable about keeping agreements. Don't be the person that lets down agreements. If you can't keep an agreement, renegotiate the agreement in time. Now, what happens when there aren't agreements is people start to make complaints, because something's wrong. And we all know about complaints. Something's wrong. Here's what's wrong. I'm complaining. And the trouble with a complaint is that there isn't any, there's no part of the complaint that shows a way forward. There's lots of complaints in business. People complain about their bosses. Executives complain about their teammates, and it doesn't lead anywhere. So usually what we can do here is we can turn a complaint into a request, because a complaint is vague and it's problem oriented. This is wrong, and we know as coaches that, okay, when something is wrong, there needs to be the other side to it. What needs to happen instead? Because as we know, goals can't be defined by what doesn't happen. They can only be defined by what does happen and what we want to happen. So when you make a request in order to make an agreement, you make it specific, you make it owned by you. I would like you to do this. You give the situation, you explain the situation, why it's important, and you ask for a future action. Now, this sounds very simple. However, at least in my experience, it's very difficult for executives to do. They are very pushed for time, and they tend to expect other people to do things without very clear requests. And one of the most important things I think that you can help an executive with is to make clear requests. I would like you to do this report, this particular report. I would like it to be done by next week. This is my request to you. It's an important report. I'm going to need it in the meeting in the week after, and I'd like you to deliver that by Friday. That's a clear request. And then, to get an agreement, of course, the other person says, yes, I will do that report by Friday, and I will get it to you by Friday afternoon. Then you have an agreement. Without a request, if the report isn't done, you get a complaint. The report wasn't done. And then the other person will complain, well, you never told me. It wasn't clear. But of course it's clear. You knew we had the meeting next week. You knew I needed that. No, I didn't. You never told me. So lack of clarity and communication is always overcome by making good, clear requests and then getting agreement as a result of that. So I'm going to move on pretty quickly now to the third key, one that's perhaps more familiar to us as coaches, and that's questions. So if we think of these three keys, presence is about you, agreements are about the two of you, coach and client, and questions is about what you do, your skill, because the main skill of a coach is to ask good questions. They're present, they listen, and they ask questions as a result of that listening. The questions will only be as good as the listening that you do, and the answers will only be as good as the questions. Ask a good question, get a good answer. So questions are really a key. And a question is a kind of invitation to think. That's my simplest definition of a question. It's an invitation to think. Something that a lot of us don't like to do. We think off the top of our heads. We kind of give the first answer that comes along. Sometimes it's good enough, sometimes it isn't. For executives, it's hardly ever good enough. They always need to think better because they're dealing with very complex problems. So your questions, your invitations to think need to be in the right area, and they need to be phrased well. So what do questions do? They do a lot of things, and we'll go into this in great detail. They can create or break or maintain rapport, relationship, depending on the question that you ask and how you ask it. Questions are very much about the connection that you have between the two, between you and your client. Questions can evoke emotion. They can change emotion. They can dampen down emotion. There is no clear break between emotion and thinking. We know from neuroscience that emotion and thinking always go together, that whenever we think, emotion comes into it. Whenever we make a decision, emotion comes into it. Maybe not a great deal, but our thinking and our decision making ranges from a very small amount of emotion to, of course, the sorts of decisions and thinking where emotion really takes it over. But there's always emotion in there. Of course, questions stimulate thinking. They get information. They can clarify an issue, or they can confuse an issue. Questions can definitely confuse people, and we can learn a lot about the sorts of questions that do confuse people, what's wrong with them, in order to model what's right and what can be used to clarify. Of course, questions can orient you in time. They can refer to the past, they can refer to the present, they can refer to the future. What did you do? What are you doing? What will you do? So a question, depending on the verb tense, can be a time machine that can take the executive back into the past to review what they did, to make them think in the present, or to make them look into the future to see what's going to happen. And of course they direct their thinking, and they make a point. A question necessarily highlights something that you, the coach, have thought is important and has brought it forward and for the executive to think about. Questions do a lot. Questions are great. And people need to think about questions in a way that they don't need to think about statements, which is why questions are so important instead of just giving advice or making suggestions or telling people what to do, because those do not make people think. They just make people accept or reject, usually. Okay, so there's a number of different models of coaching questions, and we'll go into these in much more detail in the executive certification. First of all, there are the what's called Kipling Questions, which comes from a poem by the English poet Rudyard Kipling that starts, "I have 6 faithful serving men," and these 6 faithful servants are these 6 words that are below: who and what and how and why and where and when. And most questions in English will start with one of those words. Who will ask about people. What will ask about, well, could be goals, could be values, could be anything really. How will ask about action, strategy, method. Why will ask about reasons or values. Where will ask about places, and when will ask about time. So those are very clear sorts of questions, and many coaches stick with just that model, and it's a perfectly good model, but there are others, many others. Here's another one. The TED model, the so-called TED model, which comes from tell me more. So an open invitation to speak more about it. Give me an example. Very important question. Executives can talk very abstractly about what's right or wrong, whereas when you get an example, a concrete, real example of what they're talking about, it makes it much clearer. And then describe. Please describe the situation. So again, a very open invitation. So these 3 questions are not pointed like the Kipling model, but they're much more like open invitations, and they're best used before the more pointed Kipling model questions to get the executive to talk more round the issue. We have the T model, and the T model refers to the fact that questions can ask the client to expand, go sideways on what they're saying, to bring in more facts about the whole situation. But they can also go deeply into one aspect of the situation. So coaches need to do both. They need to ask the expansive questions, which is more like the TED model, describe this, tell me something about it, tell me more. So you're getting a good sense of what's going on, the whole context, where important issues aren't being left out. Once you get that, then you can drill down deeply into an important aspect of that. And the metaphor I like to use is a bit like drilling for oil. You need to explore the area first before you sink the drill. If you just go into a field and go, okay, well, we're going to dig down here, without really exploring the whole situation, then it's hit or miss. You'll probably miss. And a lot of coaches will start to ask questions that go deep before they've really covered the situation, so that they know where to dig. It's no good digging deeply into an issue until you know precisely where to dig. So that's why it's very important to have the expansive questions before you go more deeply. There's also a nice model of questions that are used in executive coaching that comes from Marshall Goldsmith. Active questions. Active questions are based on the action that the client will do and invite the client to take responsibility. And passive questions are based on a reaction where the client feels that something's happened to them. So, for example, a very simple example of a passive question would be, what made you happy today? So something happened and it made you happy. An active question would be, what can you do to be happy today? So we're not saying that anything's going to make you happy from the outside. We're saying you need to do something in order for this to happen. And these can be quite challenging when you start asking these questions to executives. Instead of getting them to rely on other people doing things, you're getting them to rely on themselves. And again, this goes back to agreements and requests and not having expectations. So if you want to follow this up, Marshall Goldsmith has a really nice website with lots of stuff that you can look at, and he talks about active and passive questions, and they're a very interesting model to use in executive coaching. So finally, why are you doing all this? Well, you're getting information, you are clarifying the goals of the executive and of the organization, you're getting the values of the executive and the organization, what's important to them, you're exploring the obstacles, what's getting in the way, and you're being of service. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying right at the beginning. If you're coaching executives, you have a leverage point, you have an opportunity to be of service, to do something that can help others, and by doing that can let the ripple effect go out, whereby you have better businesses, whereby you have happier people working in the businesses, more rewards. It's an extremely rewarding experience to be of service, and I think that's really important for an executive coach. Right at the back of everything that you do, the question is, why am I doing this? What do I want to achieve? How can I be of service to the executive, to the business, to the people that I serve? Because a coach is in service to their clients. They help their clients to be the best they can be. And that's enormously rewarding. So I'm pretty much finished the presentation, and that's just to remind you of what's happening in Jakarta. Masterclass on coaching and neuroscience, which I'll be giving neuroscience, fascinating topic, how the brain works. We know that people create their own world and their own meaning, and it makes complete sense to explore that part of us that actually does the creation, and that's the brain. The brain takes in all the information and creates the world and the meaning that we have of it. So looking at neuroscience is a fascinating topic for coaching and very, very important and growing enormously in the coaching market. We have the Congress on the 18th of February, and we have the Executive Coaching 6 Days International Certification after that. So I hope to see some of you in all of those, or all of you in some of those. And we just have a few minutes at the end if there are any comments or questions that any of you would like to make. So I'll leave it up to you. Alexis can allow you to ask questions, or if you want to type into the chat box, he'll pick up the questions and ask me.
Yes, let's allow a few seconds to let people write in their questions or comments in the questions panel.
Okay.
Yes, Andres has a question, and he said, do you know any methods to promote your coaching practice among executives?
Well, that's a closed question, I guess. The answer is yes. There are many, and it's a huge issue, of course. There are whole websites and courses and organizations devoted to getting business, of course, and it's very important. You need to be able to get business. You need to market well. So the answer is yes, but it's not something that we have time to go into right now. We will go into it in the Executive Coaching Certification. Of course, there's two aspects to it. One is the actual marketing that you do in various ways through the presentations, through the webinars, through the web, through the advertising, etc. And then there's your actual work that you do with executives. Now, most of the time, executives choose coaches by word of mouth, by recommendation from other executives. So if you do a good job with one executive, that is the best possible marketing that you can do in order to get other work, because that is the main way in executive coaching that executives choose coaches. So I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Okay, thanks. It seems there are no more questions or comments so far.
Okay, well, either I've been extremely clear and it's all very well understood, or I've been extremely unclear and everybody's thinking, what on earth was the last 45 minutes about?
No, it was very, very clear.
I hope so. I'm aware that there's a lot there, and it's a short time, and I'm just hoping that some of you will be stimulated to come to the full certification, where we can deal with these things in great detail.
All right. Yes, there seem to be no more comments, so I guess that brings us to an end.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm aware that in your part of the world it's getting on towards evening and night time. It's lunchtime here in London. So I will leave you. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope to meet many of you in Jakarta. So thank you very much.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Joseph, and thank you, everyone, for being here. We will be seeing you soon. Take care.